It's not very often that I have the opportunity to look at two different versions of the same model sword. That's exactly what I have today. Hello there, swords dude and dudettes. I am very fortunate that LK Chen has very generously routed these swords to me before they're going to their respective customers. And thank you guys for being patient while I've had these to have the chance to measure them and check their dynamics and give them a quick test and overview for everyone. So what do we have in front of us here? These are Chinese Jian, which are, again, straight double-edged swords. But these are special because these are some of the last of the fighting type of swords. These are swords all the way from the 20th century. So from not too long ago, from about 100 years ago or so, these particular designs come from. So these come from the Republican period of China's history. This is the immortal Wudang Jian. And this is a sword that we know exactly where it came from. It was designed by the military figure who was a very popular martial artist. He's a famous martial artist who practiced Wudang. General Li Jinlin, he's an accomplished martial artist and also fencer. So a lot of our modern understanding of Jian can be traced to him. And one of the things he was known for is developing his own sword. So obviously he had access to swords from the Qing dynasty, from the Republican period, but he wanted to design his own swords, and that's what we have here. So this sword is a little bit different than the sword types that were in use at the time. These motifs that we have here are similar, but in particular, this type of guard, so this type of cross, it has kind of little quillons here, and they're swept forward. That is distinct. That is a little bit different than what we usually see on Chinese swords of the period, which are usually either of a kind of animalistic face or what we would call the Ace of Spades style guards. This instead has a nice little guard here that you could actually use to protect yourself or catch an opponent's blade on. It still has the kind of gourd-shaped pommel here on the end, and the rest of it is built in such a way that it makes for a very handsome weapon. So there are two different models that are produced by LK Chen. One is the standard, so this is actually the typical design here. And you can see it's a rather long sword. And then we have the compact version here, which is more like a typical length Jian. So the original design called for a quite long sword. I'm going to pull it out here just because even though it's very long and you'd be inclined to think of this as perhaps a two-handed sword, it is quite light. This weighs less than 900 grams, and it is balanced in such a way that this is still used as a single-handed sword. So both of these are one-handed swords, and you have an option between the two. Let's take a quick look at the differences between these two models, since we have the advantage of looking at them, and see where they differ. So as I have them laid out here, there are some superficial differences we can tell even before I pull them apart. The compact edition obviously has a different type of scabbard. We have this imitation rayskin, which is very lovely. It's been lacquered and polished, and it just feels beautiful to the touch. It's very handsomely done all the way around. There's no scuff marks or scrape marks. It is just very nicely put together. And this example came with a pretty well done little suspension cord as well. So if you want to carry it, you can carry it, and you can see that it balances quite nicely when the sword is in the scabbard. By contrast, the original, the standard model, has a hole through the middle with a grommet and has a retention lanyard. These lanyards are seen on Jian going way, way back to the Song Dynasty and prior. So this is a very common convention to have the sword either with the loop going around your wrist or around the middle of your hand. In the event that anything goes wrong, you can make sure that if you lose your grip, you don't lose your sword. Also of note, there are two different types of peen that are on the sword. So neither of these have the more modern style of threaded nut construction. Both of them are peened. And when I first saw the compact design, I actually asked LK Chen what was going on here, because I hadn't seen this type of a peen done before. So the peen on the standard edition is pretty typical. It's got the little peen block on the top. It's been hammered in, and you can see it standing there at the end. But this one is done almost entirely flush, and it's got two different colors on it. On antique originals, you often will find that surrounding the end of the tang, there's been a brass jacket that has been added to the peen block. That's what they've done here. They've put a ring of brass around the tang, and then it's been hammered, and it's been hammered so flush that the entire thing looks kind of like a bullseye on the end. So that's different and unique, and it's just kind of a little bit of a higher status design that's been done to this particular compact version of the Wudang Jian. Also, as might be apparent by looking at the two next to each other, they have slightly different wraps. So the grip on the compact Jian is slightly shorter than on the original edition. But in addition, this one has rayskin that's under there. So it's like Japanese Samigawa that's done black, whereas the original just has the original wood line, both of which are seen on historic examples. And then the cotton cord wrap is done on top of it. As a result, this yields a slightly thicker grip than on the standard edition. That may be advantageous for certain individuals. For instance, I have often mentioned that I have rather large hands. Jianfa, depending on your tradition, often calls for you to hold the grip in a certain way, oftentimes with the thumb going over the middle two fingers. And depending on the type of grip you have, a very narrow grip may be difficult depending on the size of your hand. Some users may prefer a rather thicker grip. And if that's the case, a grip like this, for instance, if I wanted to pursue a formal Jianfa, a grip like this might actually suit my large hands slightly better. So you have two options there, and be aware that there are slight differences in the diameter of each. I find both comfortable, but just know that there is a difference between the two. Otherwise, the fittings do seem the same on both. All of the elements that are done in stainless steel for the scabbard, and then the cross and pommel cap and the ferrule all seem to otherwise be of the same make between the two of them. The standard edition has plain wood that has since been sanded over and polished and lacquered and is very handsomely done. It looks very pretty with this lovely blonde wood. Moving on to the blades. You can see obviously the difference in size now that the swords have been unsheathed. The standard edition in this case has a monosteel blade, so it doesn't have any particular designs in the blade. This is obviously going to be very durable, and my particular example here came with a razor sharp edge that cuts through paper without any effort each time I attempted it. The compact edition that came my way is a pattern steel blade, and it's got a very subtle grain to it in the fashion that LK Chen likes to produce. This is the very first sword from LK Chen that I've received that features LK Chen's maker's mark on it. It seems to be laser engraved, and it's done kind of right at the ricasso area here. Now, this has been something that I've been asking LK Chen to do for quite a while, so obviously I'm a fan of having maker's marks done on the blade. Now, that said, I can see how this is, if this shows up on your blade, this is not going to be something that's going to be popular for all individuals. So some people are going to see that and they're not going to care. Some people are going to see that, maybe they'll like it, that they'll say, hey, look, I've got an LK Chen sword and I'm going to be real happy with it. And other people are going to see that and they're going to be very upset because they're going to think that that's ahistorical. I think that there's still opportunity to negotiate either the placement of the mark or what shape the mark takes. This has the little LK Chen logo on it that features the Han period fencing guy with the sword and shield, the Gorang shield on there. Perhaps a more traditional mark that features something from the period, or perhaps we could do it in a way that is more traditional, as original maker's marks are done. Different approaches can be done in different types of sword with different cultures, European swords approach it one way, Japanese swords do it one way, sometimes they hide it under other elements. The important thing is we want to make sure that if we have a sword, we can tell that it's a modern-made sword from LK Chen and not an antique that someone has just aged up and is trying to pass off as an original sword. So I am happy that he's starting to include maker's marks now, but we'll see if it can perhaps be refined slightly. It's also worth noting that this particular example of the compact Jian came sharp, but not as sharp as I'm used to. It struggled a little bit against paper. Is that sharp enough for cutting water bottles, etc.? Let's find out. So as you can see, this edge is still perfectly sharp for most light backyard targets, and that is due to the type of sword that we have here. This is not a heavy, slow-moving arming sword that has a lot of mass at the hilt. This is a very light, fast fencing sword from the late part of China's history. And even though we have two different versions of it, both of them handle in ways that are going to be very popular if you're interested in practicing Tai Chi Jian. So even though we have a long sword here, this still can perform all of your Tai Chi moves just fine. Again, I am not the person to learn Jianfa from. Please follow my friends Sifu Cuddle. Check out the Great River Taoist Center if you're interested in learning actual Chinese swordsmanship. But the way that these swords balance and handle, and you can see the weapons dynamics between them, these are both very light and nimble swords compared to the heavy war swords that came before from earlier centuries. So the ability for them to be used in an unarmored setting is tremendous. The long version feels lively in one hand. You obviously could put two hands on it, but at that point, it's kind of overkill. This doesn't have the mass necessary to use two hands on it unless you just really wanted to go ham and deliver an incredible strike. So in a single hand, the standard version allows you to have tremendous reach and perhaps get in sneaky attacks against your opponent swordsman. The compact version, because it is so light, it still affords you a decent amount of reach, but it is even more light than the larger version, and so this makes for an especially fun sword to have in the hand, and you could probably train with it for an extended period of time and never tire. So once again, I'd like to thank LK Chen and the owners of these two swords for letting me have them for a little bit. I hope everyone found this interesting. These are two swords from the very end of the fencing age, from a time when swords were being phased out and were almost struggling to find their role in society, the last gasp of true swordsmanship. It's a very interesting time in Chinese sword history, and I'm glad that LK Chen was able to reproduce it for us all to take advantage of. If you're interested in a very light but lightning fast sword that still has tremendous ability to cut, check out the immortal Wudang Jian. Until next time, guys, take care. Ooh.